The sun was sinking over the New Mexico desert, painting the sand in soft shades of rose and rust, when Clara Dawson's horse went lame. She had been riding alone since morning, her satchel light, her water nearly gone, and her heart heavier than it had ever been. The wind had carried her away from Fort Stanton, away from the whispers of soldiers and the stares that burned her back. All she had wanted was silence, a place where her thoughts could rest. But out here the silence was alive. It moved with the wind, it breathed through the cottonwoods, and it watched her from the ridges. When the horse stumbled, Clara cursed softly, dismounted, and knelt beside the creature's leg. The hoof was split. She wasn't going any farther tonight. She untied the blanket roll and looked toward the Rio Bonito, where the last light shimmered like a blade. Maybe she could make camp by the water. She'd done it before. She wasn't afraid, not of the land, not of the coyotes. She'd learned to be afraid of people, not wilderness. But as she led her horse closer to the river, a sound caught her, the soft rhythm of another horse's hooves. She froze. The sound grew clearer, unhurried, confident. When he appeared through the dust, her breath hitched. The man was Apache, tall, lean, his hair tied back with a strip of leather, his chest bare except for the rawhide strap that crossed it. He sat his horse like the saddle was part of him, like the earth itself bowed to his presence. For a moment they just looked at each other across the twilight. Then he spoke, his voice low, measured, carrying a kind of quiet that came from deep knowing. "You are far from your fort, white woman," he said, not cruelly. More like a man stating a truth that already had consequences. Clara swallowed. "I'm traveling to Lincoln," she lied quickly. "My horse went lame." He dismounted in one smooth motion, the movement so fluid it seemed dreamlike. "There is no water in that direction for many miles," he said. "The river is life. Stay near it tonight." "I don't need your help," she said, though her voice betrayed her fear and exhaustion. He studied her in silence. The firelight from the coming dusk touched the scar on his shoulder, a pale mark, old, healed, and the way he looked at her wasn't angry. It was calm, patient, as though he had seen this kind of stubbornness before. "The land does not care what you need," he said simply. "It will kill you the same." For a heartbeat she thought of drawing the pistol she kept in her satchel. But she didn't. Something about his eyes, and steady, dark, unafraid, held her in place. She nodded once. "Fine. Just for tonight." He nodded too, and together they walked their horses to the riverbank. They said nothing as he gathered wood and built a small fire. His hands were quiet and sure, each movement practiced and purposeful. Clara sat across from him, hugging her knees, the orange glow catching in her hair. She felt him glance at her, not in the way men at the fort had and with hunger or judgment, but with something gentler, like curiosity without expectation. "My name is Coda," he said at last. "Clara," she answered softly. The desert wind whispered around them. Somewhere far off, a coyote cried. She didn't ask him what he was doing here or why he wasn't with his band, and he didn't ask her why a woman alone would risk death by riding through Apache land. There was an unspoken understanding that both of them had come here to escape something. When night fell, she watched him from across the fire. His face was a sculpture of stillness, the flames painting his skin in shades of bronze and shadow. He seemed made of the same earth she sat upon, strong, ancient, and endlessly alone. She wanted to ask him about his people, about the stars, about why his eyes looked like sorrow carved in stone. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "You said the river is life." He nodded once. "Water is truth. It goes where it must, even when the rocks try to stop it." Something in that struck her. The quiet wisdom, the poetry of it. Maybe it was the weariness, maybe the firelight. But for the first time in weeks, her shoulders eased. The sound of the river became a lullaby. Coda looked up at the sky. "You should sleep. Tomorrow you will need strength." She hesitated. "And you?" "I will watch," he said. So she lay down by the fire, listening to the steady rhythm of the river and his slow, even breathing. She thought of all the things she'd left behind, her husband buried after the fever, the soldiers' pitying eyes, the cold walls of the fort that had begun to feel like a cage. Out here under the wide sky she felt small but free. Before sleep took her, she opened her eyes one last time and saw him still there, unmoving, his gaze turned toward the horizon. She didn't know why, but she felt safe. safer than she'd felt in years. And though she didn't understand it yet, something inside her shifted that night. A small, fragile thread between two lonely souls had been tied, silent as the stars above them. When dawn came, the fire had burned low and the world was wrapped in a cool gray hush. The first light touched the hills like a blessing, turning the river to liquid gold. Clara stirred beneath her blanket, her eyes blinking open to find Coda still awake, sitting cross-legged near the ashes. He had not moved all night. His stillness was the kind that spoke of discipline, of a man who trusted the rhythm of the world more than the comfort of sleep. "You didn't rest," she said softly. He turned his gaze to her. "I rested with my eyes open," he replied, a faint hint of humor flickering across his lips. The first sign of warmth she had seen from him. Clara smiled faintly and pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She felt awkward and grateful all at once. Her horse grazed nearby, favoring its injured leg, but no worse off than before. "I should head east before it gets too hot," she said, trying to sound certain. Coda rose, his shadow stretching long across the sand. "East is dry. The mountains will give you no mercy. Ride north instead. There is a trail that follows the water. It leads to a small settlement. How do you know?" His expression didn't change. "I have walked every mile of this land since I was a boy." He looked at her horse, then back at her. "The hoof must heal." "You cannot ride today," she frowned. "Then I'll walk." He shook his head slowly, his dark hair brushing his shoulders. "You would not reach shelter before the sun burns you." Clara stared at him, caught between pride and reason. She was not used to being told what to do, not since her husband's death when she had vowed never again to be anyone's burden. But there was no anger in Coda's tone, only quiet fact, and maybe that's what disarmed her. "What do you suggest?" she asked finally. He pointed toward the cottonwoods by the river. "Stay here. One night more." Her lips parted. The words felt heavier than they should have. Stay. The same word that would return to haunt her. She looked away, toward the water shimmering in the sun. "You speak as though I can trust you," she said softly. Coda's gaze followed hers. "If I meant harm, you would not still be speaking." The calm certainty in his voice made her heartbeat falter. She didn't answer, couldn't. Instead, she busied herself gathering her few things, pretending to be indifferent. But when she brushed past him, she caught the faint scent of smoke and sage on his skin, and it made her chest tighten with something unnameable. The day stretched on slow and golden. Coda fished from the river while Clara mended her horse's hoof as best she could. Once she looked up to find him watching her, not intrusively, but like a man memorizing a rare moment of peace. Their eyes met and neither looked away. Something passed between them, quiet, undeniable, frightening in its simplicity. When the evening came, they shared a small meal. The trout he'd caught roasted over the fire was the best thing she'd tasted in months. She laughed softly at herself for saying so, and he smiled. The faintest curve of his mouth. The kind of smile that was gone before she could be sure it had been there at all. "You laugh like the river," he said quietly. Clara blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, his eyes reflecting the firelight, "you sound like something that does not know it is free until it moves." Her chest tightened again. "You speak in riddles," he shook his head. "No, you listen in walls." The word struck her deeper than he knew. For a long time she had built her heart from walls, each one made of loss, of guilt, of fear that love was something that only hurt. But Coda's eyes saw through all of it, and that scared her more than loneliness ever had. As darkness fell again, the air turned cool. She wrapped her blanket around her shoulders, sitting near the fire. Coda sat a few feet away, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The rhythm of the blade against stone was steady, soothing. She watched his hands, strong, capable, and thought of how different he was from the men she had known. No boasting, no cruelty, no need to prove anything. His power came from quiet, from the way he seemed to belong to the earth itself. Without looking at her, he spoke. "You are running from something." Clara stiffened. "And if I am? Then it will follow," he said simply. "Until you stop running and face it." Her throat tightened. "I can't go back there. Everything I loved is buried." Coda's eyes lifted to her face. "Then why do you still carry it with you?" She turned away sharply, blinking back tears. You don't understand. I understand grief, he said, and his tone changed. Softer now, touched with something old and wounded. It walks beside me every day. That silence that followed was deep, full of all the things neither of them could say. She wanted to ask what he had lost, who had broken him the way the world had broken her, but she didn't. Some questions were sacred like graves. Hours passed. The stars came out silver and endless. The river murmured beside them like a low voice singing to the night. Clara finally spoke, almost in a whisper. You said one more night, just tonight. Coda turned his gaze to her, and in his eyes the fire burned like distant lightning. Yes, he said. Just tonight. But they both knew it was a lie. Because in the hush between their words, something far older than promise or logic had taken root. A bond neither of them had sought, yet neither could sever. When she finally lay down, she could not sleep. Every sound, the crackle of the fire, the whisper of the wind, felt heavy with meaning. She watched Coda through the darkness, the faint light brushing across his profile. He was watching the river again like a man guarding the edge between this world and another, and when she closed her eyes, she knew, even if she rode away tomorrow, she would never be the same. Something had already changed, something that no road could undo. The morning broke harsh and bright, the kind of light that made the desert look endless and cruel. Clara woke to the smell of smoke, not from their campfire but from something far older and larger. Coda was already on his feet, every muscle in his body tense. He didn't speak. He only looked toward the horizon, where a thin column of black rose against the pale sky. What is it? Clara asked, sitting up quickly. Coda's eyes narrowed. Soldiers, her breath caught. From the fort? He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. She felt her stomach twist. The army patrols had been scouring the land for months, hunting Apache bands after another raid up north. They didn't ask who was guilty or innocent. To them, every native face was the enemy. And to be found with one, even a man like Coda, could mean her own death, or worse. We have to go, he said. Clara nodded, her pulse hammering. He moved swiftly, gathering his few things, throwing a water skin and bough across his back. She followed, her hands trembling as she packed what little she had. The horse limped slightly but obeyed as Coda led them north, away from the rising dust in the distance. For hours they rode in silence, the heat bearing down like punishment. The desert shimmered, the horizon bending under the weight of the sun. Every time she turned, Clara could see the faint smear of dust growing larger. Riders, pursuers. When they reached the mouth of a canyon, Coda dismounted. We go on foot, he said. The sound of hooves will draw them. She obeyed without question now, her fear swallowed by adrenaline. The canyon swallowed them, red walls rising on both sides, the air cool and shadowed. Coda moved like water, soundless, sure. Clara followed, her breath ragged. Finally, when they reached a narrow bend, he stopped and pressed his hand against the rock. His palm lingered there as though the stone itself spoke to him. Then he turned to her. We will wait here. The canyon hides us. She looked at him, panting, her hair clinging to her neck. And if they find us? Then I will die first, he said, his tone calm, so calm it broke her heart. No, she whispered fiercely. You can't, but he raised a hand to silence her. Do not waste your breath on what you cannot change. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed faintly, bouncing off the canyon walls. They crouched in the shadows side by side. Clara's hands shook and Coda noticed. Slowly he reached out and covered her fingers with his own. His touch was steady, grounding, the warmth of his skin a silent promise. Do not fear, he said. Fear blinds the heart. Clara swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. I know your silence, he said softly. It sounds like mine. The hoofbeats grew louder and they both froze. Through the slit of light between the rocks, Clara glimpsed the flash of blue coats. Soldiers, rifles glinting, dust swirling around their horses. They passed by, shouting in English too distant to understand. Coda didn't move until the sound faded completely. Only then did he exhale, slow and quiet. When he finally looked back at her, she was crying. He brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb, a gesture so tender, so unexpected. She forgot to breathe. It is over, he whispered, but it wasn't. Not truly. They stayed hidden until the sun dipped low again. The heat softened into gold, the shadows long and merciful. Coda led her out of the canyon and toward a grove of mesquite trees. There, beside a trickling spring, they stopped to rest. Clara sank to her knees, exhausted. Her dress was torn, her skin raw from the climb, but her heart was alive, beating too fast, too wild. Coda knelt beside her, filling a small clay cup from his water skin. He offered it to her, and when she drank, his fingers brushed her lips. Something passed between them again. That quiet pull neither could resist. The air between them thickened, heavy with all the words unsaid. "I should go," she whispered, even as her voice trembled. "If the soldiers find us, they will not," he said. His gaze held hers. "Not tonight." The words were almost the same as before, yet different now. Deeper, more dangerous. She wanted to argue, but she couldn't. The weight of his eyes, the warmth of his presence, the way the dying light painted his skin, it all dissolved her resistance. "Who are you really, Coda?" she asked quietly. "Not just an Apache. You move like a man with ghosts." He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I was once a son, a husband, a father." Clara's breath hitched. "Was?" "The soldiers came," he said simply. "They called it justice." His eyes darkened, but his voice stayed calm. "There was fire. I buried what was left." Her throat closed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and she meant it, more deeply than she'd meant anything in years. Coda looked at her then, truly looked. "Do not be sorry. The land takes what it must, but sometimes it gives something back." His hand brushed hers, slow, uncertain, as if asking permission from fate itself. She didn't pull away. The air between them shifted, something ancient stirring, born of loss and longing, and the unbearable ache of two souls who had forgotten what it meant to be seen. When he leaned closer, she didn't resist. His lips brushed her forehead, light as breath, reverent. Not a claim, a confession. Clara closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt warmth that wasn't from a fire. A heat that came from being known, from being found in the wilderness not as a stranger, but as something worth saving. When he drew back, she whispered, "You said the river is truth. What does it say about us?" He hesitated. Then in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "It says all things that meet must one day part." Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't look away. The truth hurt, but it was beautiful too, like the moment before dawn when light and darkness share the same breath. And though neither of them said another word, both knew it was already too late. The river had spoken. That night, the sky above the canyon was a cathedral of stars, 1,000 silent witnesses to what could never be spoken aloud. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of sage and river water. Clara sat by the fire, her shawl draped loosely around her shoulders, watching the flames dance against the darkness. Coda sat across from her, his face carved in shadow and light. Neither had spoken for a long while. The silence between them was not empty. It pulsed with the memory of his touch, the ghost of his breath against her skin. The fire popped softly, and Clara finally found her voice. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked. Coda looked up, his expression unreadable. "Different?" "Yes." Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. "That you could go back. That there hadn't been loss." He was quiet for a long time before he answered. "If there had been no loss, I would not have met you." Her chest tightened. It wasn't a confession of love, and not in words, but it was the closest thing to it. She felt something inside her tremble, like a thread pulled too tight. "You speak like you've made peace with it," she whispered. "But how can a man make peace with pain like that?" Coda's gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the moon hung low and red. "Pain is the only thing the land gives freely. You learn to live with it, or it eats you alive." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had seen the world break and still stood tall upon its bones. Clara looked down at her hands. "I thought I was the only one left," she said softly. "The only one who knew what it meant to lose everything." Coda's eyes found hers again. "You are not alone." The air stilled between them. For a moment, the world felt smaller, just firelight and two hearts that had spent too long learning to be alone. She wanted to reach for him, to close the space between them, but something in his gaze stopped her. Respect, reverence, fear of what it would mean if he touched her again. But it was she who moved first. Slowly, she rose and crossed the small distance between them. The fire cast her in gold and amber as she knelt before him. His breath caught when her hand brushed his cheek, tentative, trembling. "Coda," she said softly, "I don't want to forget this, even if tomorrow takes it away." He didn't speak. He only closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man surrendering to something he could no longer fight. Then his hand came up, fingers curling gently around her wrist, holding her there, not to stop her, but to anchor her, as if to say, yes, this is real. When their lips met, it was not wild or desperate. It was slow, aching, reverent, two broken souls finding shelter in each other. The kiss was a promise neither could ever keep, and that made it all the more sacred. The world outside ceased to exist. The wind hushed. The river softened its song, and for that one fragile moment they were no longer Apache and settler, no longer outlaws in a divided land. They were just a man and a woman who had both lost too much and found something that made life bearable again. When they parted, her tears caught the firelight like small jewels. He brushed one away with his thumb, his eyes full of things words could never carry. "I should not have," he began. But she silenced him with a whisper. Don't ruin it with regret." He exhaled slowly, the weight of centuries in his breath. "The world will not allow this." "Then let the world burn," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. He almost smiled, a flicker of warmth breaking through his solemn mask. "You have a warrior's heart. And you," she whispered, "have a poet's soul." They sat together until the fire turned to ash and the night grew deep. Coda told her stories of his childhood, of riding bareback through the high mesas, of songs sung to the moon, of the woman he had loved and lost to the fire. In turn, Clara told him of her husband, the fever that took him, the small grave she had dug with her own hands. Their pain became a bridge, their stories an unspoken vow: you are not forgotten. Neither am I. When she grew tired, she lay against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It sounded like the river, endless and sure. "Will they keep hunting you?" she asked drowsily. "Yes," he said. "Men fear what they do not understand." "And me?" He hesitated. "If they find you with me, they will call you traitor." Her fingers tightened in the fabric of his shirt. "Then I'll take that name with pride." He didn't answer, but the way his hand rested over hers told her everything. The night stretched long and gentle, filled with soft breaths and the whisper of leaves. But dawn came too soon, the cruel kind of dawn that breaks what darkness has protected. The first light painted the canyon walls blood red. Coda rose quietly, his movements deliberate, almost sorrowful. Clara stirred. "Where are you going?" "To scout," he said. "The soldiers will not give up." She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "Don't go far." He looked down at her, the faintest shadow of a smile crossing his lips. "I will return before the sun is high," but something in his eyes told her he wasn't certain. He hesitated, then leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers. "Stay by the river. Promise me." She nodded, but the word she wanted to say, "stay," caught in her throat. When he disappeared beyond the rocks, the world felt emptier. The wind moved through the canyon like a sigh. She watched the river sparkle under the rising sun and tried not to think of how easily beauty could turn to grief. Hours passed, and still he did not return. Each sound made her heart lurch. She wanted to believe he was safe, that he was coming back. But deep down, she knew the desert did not make promises it could keep. By midday, smoke rose again on the horizon, and the wind began to carry the faint, distant echo of gunfire. The sound of gunfire cracked the air like thunder splitting the sky. Clara froze, her breath shattering in her chest. The canyon that had felt so peaceful now trembled with echoes of violence. She ran to the edge of the rocks, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. Dust rose in the distance, and among it, faintly, horribly, came the screams of men and the unmistakable rhythm of rifles. "Coda," she whispered, her voice breaking. For a moment she couldn't move. Her body refused to believe what her heart already knew. He had gone toward the danger, not away from it, because that was who he was, a protector, a man who carried his pain like armor and would rather face death than see another life lost because of him. She forced herself to move, to run. The rocks scraped her palms as she climbed. The world around her blurred, dust stinging her eyes. When she reached the rise overlooking the plain, she saw them. A patrol of soldiers, blue coats flashing in the sunlight, rifles raised. And among them, a figure on horseback, dark against the glare. Coda. He rode like the wind itself had lent him its strength, bow drawn, his hair streaming behind him. His horse weaved between bullets like a spirit, fearless and fast. Every movement was grace and fury combined. He fired once, then again, each shot clean, controlled, deliberate. But there were too many of them. 10, maybe more. And Clara knew deep in her bones that he hadn't gone to fight for himself. He had gone to lead them away from her. No, she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. No, please. She stumbled down the slope, her boots slipping in the sand. The world around her thundered, the scream of hooves, the crack of guns, the roar of her heartbeat in her ears. She didn't care. She ran until her lungs burned. When she reached the dry wash below, the fight had moved toward the ridge. The soldiers were shouting, some already fallen. And then she saw it. The flash of a rifle, the sharp sound that split the world in two. Coda's body jerked violently, and he fell from his horse, tumbling into the dust. The cry that tore from Clara's throat didn't sound human. She ran, stumbling, falling, clawing her way to him. The battle around her faded to nothing. She dropped to her knees beside him, gathering his head in her lap. Blood stained the ground, dark and spreading, but his eyes were still open. Dark, steady, unafraid. Coda. Please, no, please. He tried to speak, his breath ragged. I told you to stay. I couldn't, she sobbed. I couldn't let you go alone. He gave a faint smile, small, broken, but still him. You are stubborn as the wind. She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the blood warm against her palm. Don't talk. You'll be all right. I'll stop the bleeding, but he shook his head slowly. It is already done. His gaze drifted upward toward the pale sky. It is a good place to die. The river is near. Don't say that, she cried. Don't you dare leave me now. He looked at her again, and in that look was everything. The nights by the fire, the laughter, the quiet understanding between two lost souls. You gave me peace, he whispered. No one has done that since before the fire. You made me remember that I was still a man. She bent forward, her forehead pressed against his. Then stay with me, she begged. Please, we'll run. We'll find another place. His hand rose weakly, fingers brushing her cheek. No, you must live. Tears blurred her vision. Not without you. You will, he said softly. Because you must. Promise me. She shook her head violently, sobbing. I can't, he coughed, the sound wet and final. Promise. Her heart broke as she whispered, I promise. A long silence followed. The battle sounds had faded. Only the river's distant murmur filled the air. His breathing grew shallow, his hand falling from her face to the earth. For a moment his eyes flickered, not with fear but with calm. He looked past her toward something she couldn't see. The river, he breathed. It calls my name. And then he was gone. Clara sat frozen, her hands trembling against his still chest. The wind moved through the canyon, soft and sorrowful. Around her the world carried on, birds rising from the rocks, the river singing its endless song. But for her, time had stopped. She didn't know how long she sat there, minutes, hours. The sun moved, shadows lengthened. When at last the soldiers were gone, she buried him by the river's edge where the cottonwoods grew and the water spoke in whispers. She marked the grave with stones, her fingers raw and bloodied, her tears soaking into the sand. When she was done, she sat beside the mound, her voice hoarse and low. You said all things that meet must part, she whispered. But you didn't say how to live after. The river answered only with silence. Days later, when she finally left, she carried his bow strapped to her saddle and a small piece of his beaded bracelet around her wrist. She didn't ride back to the fort. She went north, following the same river he had loved, letting it guide her as though it still carried his voice in its current. Sometimes, at dusk, when the wind came soft through the mesquite and the stars began to rise, she thought she could hear him, that quiet, steady voice that had once stopped her from walking away. Stay, it whispered, just tonight, and so she did.